Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Poverty Solutions Summit and to the Community Control Initiative panel. My name is Mileyka Burgos-Flores. I am the Executive Director of the Allapattah Collaborative CDC, a nonprofit organization and place-based initiative that uses the Main Street approach to revitalize commercial corridors as to mitigate climate gentrification pressures. Our goal is to protect and strengthen the identity, charm, and cultural appeal of our Allapattah neighborhood, as well as other ethnic communities in Miami, by ensuring that long-term residents are able to thrive in an environment plagued with disparities, misinformation, and disinvestment. Our strategies focus on collaboration, education, and coaching to empower individual, micro-businesses, and the community. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Deyanira del Rio. Deyanira is the co-director of New Economy Project, a New York City-based organization that works with community groups to build an economy that works for all. Rooted in racial justice, neighborhood equity, and ecological sustainability. They has worked for more than 20 years to promote cooperative and community-controlled finance, immigrant economic rights, and equitable neighborhood development. At New Economic Project, she has worked to advance community land trust, public banking, and financial justice campaigns, and helped launch the organization's foreclosure prevention, DACA, and New Economies Loan Fund. Let's welcome Deyanira del Rio. We also have with us today Lydia Lowe. Lydia is the Executive Director of the Chinatown Community Land Trust. The Chinatown Community Land Trust works to stabilize the future of Chinatown as a neighborhood for working-class families and a regional hub for Chinese community through community control of the land, development without displacement, permanently affordable housing, and shared neighborhood spaces. Core programs areas include preservation of small properties as permanent affordable housing, planning for a Chinatown historic and cultural district, and community governance of shared assets. Ms. Lowe has 3 decades organizing and advocating experience in Chinatown, including leadership of a successful $1.5 million capital campaign to build out a community center, preservation of more than 1,000 units of low-income housing, and creation of Chinatown Master Plan 2020. Thank you so much, Ms. Lowe, for joining us today.
Thank you.
It is my honor to introduce to you Ms. Shalanda Baker. Shalanda Baker is the Deputy Director for Energy Justice in the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity at the U.S. Department of Energy. Prior to her appointment, she was a professor of law, public policy, and urban affairs at Northeastern University. She has spent over a decade conducting research on the equity dimensions of the global transition away from fossil fuel energy to clean energy resources. She is the author of over a dozen articles, book chapters, and essays on renewable energy, law, energy justice, energy policy, and renewable energy development. She is the co-founder and co-director of the Initiative for Energy Justice, an organization committed to providing technical law and policy support to communities on the front lines of climate change. Her forthcoming book, Revolutionary Power, an Activist Guide to Energy Transition, argues that energy policy should be the next domain to advance civil rights. Welcome, Ms. Baker.
Thank you so much, Mileyka. Great to be here.
So, now that we're ready to start this rich conversation with our powerhouse panelists, we'll reserve the last 15 minutes of the hour for your questions. So please type your questions into the chat box. So, Deyanira, you are a true powerhouse. Your work is the epitome of economic inclusion and racial justice. Thank you for all you do, girl. So, public banking. It's a way to equitably finance many of the community control initiatives we're talking about today. The Public Bank of New York City Coalition has a large number of with various goals. Stakeholders vary quite a bit, from credit unions to cooperative developers and so on. Can you tell us more about public banking a transformative power in how the coalition and campaign came together.
Sure. Thank you, Mileyka. And thank you so much to Catalyst Miami for the invitation to be here. I'm really excited to be sharing some of the work that our coalition is doing in New York City to fight for a just financial system and economy. Our organization works with groups citywide on a range of campaigns, including public banking, as strategies to really change the way economic development works. And to make sure that our economy is rooted in equity, racial justice, and sustainability. So thank you again. What I'd like to do is just explain a little bit about public banking and then talk about the story of how our coalition and campaign came together. I'm sure many people are familiar and have read about public banking, but in a nutshell, what public banks are financial institutions that are created by a government. In our case, we're pushing for the government of New York City to create a public bank. It could be a county or state also that creates a public bank. And the bank is chartered specifically to work for the public good, and it's accountable to the people. So unlike a private bank, which has shareholders and executives, and the banks work to maximize profits for those shareholders and others, a public bank is really mission driven to serve the local economy and the people. And in our vision, the public bank is really going to be rooted in all the principles that our organizations involved are fighting for. So making sure that the public bank is investing in equitable and community-led economic development. It's not primarily public banks are not primarily banks where you or I would go in and open an account and borrow money. The way that they work primarily is to strengthen community-based and cooperative lenders that know their communities and help them to grow to serve individuals. But the public bank itself is really a bank, in our case, for the city of New York. So I wanted to just draw that distinction as well. So our coalition launched publicly in 2018 with a big action on Wall Street, which was a lot of fun. You can watch it on the coalition's website, Public Bank NYC, and read more about the campaign. And a little bit about the structure. It includes many of the groups that are working in their neighborhoods to change the way economic development works. So worker-owned businesses, community land trusts, mutual housing associations, base building and member-led organizations fighting for economic and social justice in their communities, and community development financial institutions are all part of the coalition. And we have a steering committee that is, and also work groups that are carrying out the activities. And in the coalition's work and its leadership roles and fundraising, we're really prioritizing the engagement of base building and community-based groups. And just to underscore, there are public bank efforts all over the country. For us, the coalition building has really been the key and preceded any kind of legislative or other action that we undertook. And, the reasons hopefully are obvious, but we wanted to make sure that we had a broad base of support for this effort, that whatever public bank is created is really shaped by and informed by communities that are right now most harmed by our financial system and economy, and that communities are articulating the needs that need to be met by the public bank. And of course, it's also important to have this, a strong coalition and to have all of, a lot of research and other work kind of under our belts so that we're ready when the inevitable opposition shows up. And I'll just, just a little bit more background is that many of our groups that are in the coalition have long worked for years and decades to fight bank redlining, predatory lending, payday lending, extraction of wealth in Black and Brown communities throughout New York City. And I think everyone, there's a much broader kind of public understanding of the need to change our financial system, which has become too powerful, brought our economy to the brink of collapse in 2008. And since then has just continued to consolidate its power and size and continues to fuel climate destruction, private prisons, real estate speculation and displacement, and many other harmful industries. So, one principle of our campaign and coalition is that we need a radically different economy and financial system, and that we need public institutions and policies that are rooted in these principles of racial and economic justice and ecological sustainability, that economic development must center these values. Just to say that you could create a public bank that isn't rooted in social justice or racial justice. And here in New York, our campaign is really rooted in these movements and principles, and we're very unapologetic about what needs to happen in order to repair past harms that our economic development institutions and policies have created. And another principle that underlies our coalition work is that public money must be used for the public good. So New York City obviously is a large city, more than 8 million people. And just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, every year New York City collects tens of billions of dollars from taxes and other sources of revenue. And that money is almost entirely held by mainstream big banks. And those are the same banks that have long redlined New York City neighborhoods, that helped fuel the predatory mortgage lending and foreclosure crisis, that continue to fuel, fossil fuel extraction, climate change, and other harms. So, for us, it's really not a radical principle that the city of New York should have the ability to use its public money to invest in our local economy, in our local neighborhoods, and to meet the needs of the people of our city. So, for us, it's practical and straightforward, but in some ways, it can be seen as radical because it does run counter to what currently exists and how Wall Street holds as many cities kind of hostage, really, by not providing alternatives for cities. And we saw this in Seattle and in other parts of the country where cities have attempted to divest from certain banks and been stymied in their efforts to do so because there aren't many meaningful alternatives. And so this is really helping also to fuel the growing movement for public banking across the country, in addition to, just the kind of fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, which has obviously exacerbated and highlighted so many economic and other disparities. So all of this is sort of creating greater urgency, greater need, and greater opportunity for the work that we and many others around the country are doing to create new public banks.
Wow, such great information, and definitely systems change from the bottom up, right?
That's what we hope.
I'm sorry?
Yes, that is definitely our vision, is that the grassroots is informing.
Yes. Well, we're also going to welcome Lydia. Lydia, thank you so much for all the work that you have done on community land trust field. I know it's not an easy feat, but let me ask you. We know that starting a community land trust is difficult. One big part of it is that you're starting a complex real estate acquisition and development project, usually with a strong critique of capital and unorthodox economics, right? So can you tell us more about community land trusts, what they are, the challenges they present, and how do you guys manage to stick to the values?
Sure, and I think you captured some of those tensions and contradictions exactly in your question, because the role of a community land trust is really for the community to have a way to protect and stabilize the community from some of the worst predatory aspects of land speculation. But the challenge is, and the power of a CLT is comes from land ownership, because land ownership and private property rights are deeply embedded in our system as the most, one of the strongest forms of power. So we're trying to flip that script and use land ownership on behalf of the community in order to ensure things that are important to our community beyond monetary value. On the other hand, we're operating within that whole system and competing often within a real estate market that's driven by the big developers and financial players. So those are the core challenges. But I think, in this moment, this is the moment for community land trusts. Stable housing and community are central to the health and economic well-being that we're striving for. And in many ways, that land, that geographic community is a community strategic base for power. You know, the first founder of the first community land trust in Georgia said, all power comes from the land and the land comes from God. And I think that we're trying to take that to heart in the work that we're doing. And I was very excited to hear your mayor talk about the 4 E's, because those 4 E's are a lot of what's driving our vision as well. And the final E, engagement, is the most important piece in terms of ensuring, like you're saying, that the community remains in charge and that we're preserving our values. So just as an example, I mean, we're actually quite a young organization. We started in 2015 in Boston, Chinatown, but a lot of us are old. We've been around in the struggle for decades before that. I think what's interesting for us is not necessarily so much what we've accomplished in terms of land ownership. We don't own a lot of land yet, but what's interesting are the things that the Community Land Trust as a tool opened up for us. And the variety of ways that that kind of collective governance and ownership can help to stabilize a community. So I would divide our work into 4 main.
Oh no,
we lost her. I'm sorry. Hopefully she will be coming right back on and joining us shortly. But in the meantime, may we continue with... oh, there she is. Hi, Lydia. We
have a lot of internet users in my house. So I think that
believe me, that is the story of America lately. So yes, a lot of people working from the same connections.
So sorry about that, but
yes, please continue. Let's just make sure that that we speak a little bit slower so our interpreters are able to catch up with us. We get caught up in the conversation, I see. So yes, Lydia, please continue telling us.
So I wanted to say, in terms of the permanently affordable housing piece, our particular focus is on removing properties, particularly some of the smaller, older properties, from the private market and preserving them as permanently affordable housing. And through a 99-year ground lease, then those properties become permanently affordable, and there are restrictions on resale so that people are able to accumulate assets within the property, but it's not a speculative investment. And the homes are for people who live in them. We have a particular focus on some of the historic row houses and are looking at historic preservation as an important part of our work, but preservation that doesn't gentrify the community, because we're trying to preserve them for working class families. And another important feature of having that housing owned by the land trust is that we can help to keep people in their homes, and that it provides us the homeowners additional protection against foreclosure, because you have a land trust owning the land that may be able to help and step in if there is a danger of foreclosure, and maybe repurchase that home on behalf of the community and find ways to keep people there. The other area I mentioned was community planning. And more, we're beginning to play an important leadership role really in the community around developing a community master plan. And that community planning, in which we engage hundreds of residents in envisioning what it is that we want to happen in the future, led us increasingly to the idea of Chinatown as a historic and cultural district. So, we are looking at this in a number of ways. We want to lift up the history, the unrecognized history of Chinatown, as through an immigrant history trail. We're preserving the row houses as important physical sites that kind of show people the way that the community used to be. We support and work with other organizations on a number of cultural placekeeping projects, different kinds of public art, supporting some of the small businesses with shared marketing campaigns, which is so important in this pandemic and post-pandemic economy. And we think that creating a historic district actually empowers a historic district commission, which we're committed to being a community-driven commission. A third area that we're working on, we call shared governance of the commons, and that's kind of a broad theoretical category, but it encompasses some very real and hands-on projects. One of them is the community's only open recreational space, which is sort of a shared volleyball and basketball court. We are converting into a community-owned or community-leased space, which will be governed by the neighborhoods on both sides of the park, as well as the people who use the park the most, which has been formed as something called Friends of Reggie Wong Park, and also including doing some improvements, creating a small children's playground as part of the park, and so on. We're also working on there's a piece of public land in a community that has very little public land that's in a public disposition process, and we are advocating for the Community Land Trust to have a role in ongoing governance of this project, so that throughout the public disposition process, through developer selection, through the review process, and then beyond when the project actually gets built, we want the community to be at the table, to make sure that the housing remains permanently affordable, to make sure that an envisioned Chinatown library gets built according to what the community wants, and to be sure that public spaces that are promised to the community don't get privatized later, as we've seen with many different projects. Another type of shared governance that we're working on that's longer term is we're working on shared governance of a Chinatown microgrid. And this is a project in which we will be linking electricity and energy users in different buildings in the cloud, so that the energy use can be, we can create cost savings by kind of evening out the peaks and valleys of energy use, as well as reinforcing resilience during emergencies, because we know that Chinatown is in a high danger flood zone for the future. And the goal of this microgrid is that these benefits should accrue to all the members of the community, whether you're a large landowner or you're a small energy user, and have the people of the community involved in making those decisions. And then the final and probably most important piece of a community land trust is the engagement piece. We're very active in organizing around policy reform, things like short-term rental regulation, zoning reform, tenant option to purchase, finance and revenue streams for community land trust and cooperative projects, peer learning with other community land trusts around how we use our organizing power to acquire new properties, but also a lot of just day-to-day community building within Chinatown, so that neighbors get to know each other and really figure out what is it that they want to happen to this piece of land. And I think that's the most challenging part of being in a community land trust is you're often a one-person organization when you get started. You are learning, if you're like me, an organizer, learning the complexities of finance, development, and legal issues involved in acquisition and development. But in order to really do what you are trying to accomplish, it's key to keep the organizing central to everything you're doing.
Wow. Like, speechless, because just thinking about sharing this energy grid and how you're keeping culture and preservation in your community, and so many pieces to that puzzle, and that's one of the things that I recognize in what Deyanira said and what you said, is that there's so many pieces to the puzzle, and at the end of the day, what we end up with is systems change, which is exactly where many of these lead. I'm going to Now, welcome, Ms. Baker. And first of all, Ms. Baker, congratulations on your new appointment. It's an honor to have you with us. In your book, Revolutionary Power, which I can't wait to read, you argue that people of color, poor people, and indigenous people must engage in the creation of a new energy system in order to upend the unequal power dynamics of the current system. You provide a playbook for how to create those changes, but for the participants that are here with us today, they may be wondering, how do you get that happening, right? Can you please talk to us about how to get started with the transformational work? And can you provide 3 key actions that they can take starting today?
So thank you so much, Mileyka, for the introduction. Before I start, I should say that I'm also dialing in from so-called Boston, right, which is land that was taken from the Wampanoag, Nipmuc, and Mashpee tribes. And the Wampanoag people are the people of the first light. And so I always want to acknowledge them in my work because it is on energy and on energy justice. And energy is also about light, right? And so I hope that my work honors their struggle.
Yes.
So Lydia, Lydia, it's so great to see you again. I'm just like, Lydia and I have interacted before, particularly on the microgrid project that she mentioned, and I didn't have any hand in any part of it, but got to learn about it in a meeting. So I'm so glad it's continuing to move forward. I'm just delighted to be here to talk about energy on a panel that really connects to energy, even though it wasn't explicitly mentioned. And so I am going to get to your question on the 3 concrete things and takeaways. But I also want to make sure that I acknowledge the intricate links among access to capital. So Dianira, your work is so fundamental to a just transition and to a just energy system. So we need access to capital in communities that have for so long been burdened by the energy system. We need to make sure that they can afford to participate in the new energy system through access to rooftop solar, creating community-owned energy projects. And I know there's going to be a panel on that later today or tomorrow, as well as things like storage, which are batteries that can help a household stay safe in the middle of something like a hurricane. I know Miami knows about those types of outages, or a wildfire or power shutoff that is induced by the threat of a wildfire. So access to capital is an essential part of a just energy transition, and access to land and housing security are also integral features of a just energy transition. And so what I want to say today is that there are links among the fight for housing justice, the fight for racial justice, and the fight for a more just energy future. And so these are pieces that we need to begin to put together in all of our advocacy. And so I come to energy justice having spent time in 2 amazing places. One is Oaxaca, Mexico, in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, which is a place that is diverse and beautiful and really home to no fewer than 14 indigenous groups who've been fighting for land sovereignty vis-a-vis large-scale wind energy development. So there's an ongoing struggle there against clean energy. And so I just want to put a placeholder there. I also come to this work having spent time in Hawaii, which is a place where people pay among the highest in the country to meet energy needs. And all of the dirtiest generation is placed in Native Hawaiian communities, Black and Brown communities. So there's an environmental justice issue there. There's an energy justice issue there. And so why do I set the stage with those 2 examples? I set the stage there because what is obvious to me based on my work over the last 10 years is that if we continue to rely on the same logics, structures, and mechanisms of the fossil fuel industry in our clean energy transition, we are doomed to replicate the inequality of the fossil fuel transition. And I want to lift up the work of Denise Fairchild and Al Weinrub, who a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, wrote a book called Energy Democracy, very much arguing for deep democracy and participation in the energy system and the use of the energy system as a vehicle for racial and social justice. And so as I led with this idea that all of these struggles are linked, we can't separate this fight for energy justice and a fight for a clean, just energy system from those struggles that Dianira and Lydia are working so hard for. And so I've mentioned energy justice a couple times, and I do want to at least define it so that our audience can have some things to hook onto. And then I'll end with a very specific response to your three, what are the three things people can do today? So what is energy justice? Energy justice is all about the equitable distribution of the goods and bads of the energy system. And so that's what it's generally thought of as in the sort of literature on energy justice. Energy justice has a few dimensions. It has procedural justice. So this is what Dianira was talking about, right? Having a seat at the table. And not just a seat at the table where they ask you your opinion after everything is done, but a seat at the table in creating the new system. The second major component of energy justice is distributive justice. So this means that I have access to solar. I have access to all the things that will make my life cleaner, right? And that my energy costs are lower. So this is distribution of the goods of a system. The third aspect is recognition justice. So we need to lift each other up. And this is what Lydia's work is doing, right? Lifting up the people in her community, lifting up ancestors, elders, acknowledging the history. Energy justice requires that we are lifting up the struggle of people who have suffered under the existing system and making sure that their needs, their hopes and dreams are reflected in energy policy. And the last major component of energy justice is really restorative justice. And that is the healing that can happen through policy. We don't often think about technical dry policy as a vehicle for healing, but I really believe that, and that's what I center my work on. And that's sort of the broad understanding of energy justice as it's talked about in the scholarly literature. Well, maybe not the healing part, but that's my interpretation of the literature. But I would also say that we need to center the voices of frontline communities in the creation of energy policy. And so centering those voices means that they're at the table, but it also means that we think about them first as we're creating this new system, because they're going to be the most vulnerable to climate change. They are already suffering due to environmental injustices in their community. So energy justice requires that their voices be at the center. And so now for the audience and the question regarding how to get involved today. So Mileyka, the book is actually already out. It was dropped a couple weeks ago. So when I sent out my bio, it wasn't yet published, but it's out. And I should say I'm speaking today in my personal capacity, not in my capacity as someone who's now at the DOE. But in the book, I really do offer a playbook for how people can get engaged in the energy transition. One key way is to simply start to pay attention to the regulatory proceedings that are happening in their communities. I mean, these are proceedings that are happening below the radar, where all of the decisions around the cost of energy and electricity, as well as whether or not a facility will be sited in your community, whether or not your community can access rooftop solar or community energy. I mean, a lot of those issues are being decided by the Public Utilities Commission or Regulatory Commission in your community. So we have a need to build capacity in communities so that they can participate in those proceedings. And that's a big gap out there in terms of a social justice issue. So get involved, maybe connect with your local civil rights organization, call your Public Utilities Commission. These are public entities. You're paying taxes to make sure that they exist. So they should be in service of you. The second thing is, how can you, questioning how you can build your own wealth, so your individual wealth through this energy transition. Are there loan instruments that are available through your state? Are there rebate programs? Are there things that you can get involved in so that you can get access to rooftop solar? Or, you know, if rooftop solar seems like a stretch for you, can you get access to weatherization assistance to make sure that you're lowering your energy cost? That is a travesty. The cost of energy is extraordinary, and Black communities, low to moderate income communities, Native communities are all paying an extraordinary amount of overall income just to meet energy needs. So how do you cut into that? Access to rooftop solar, access to energy efficiency, so that you're not paying for energy to simply go through your walls, right, and go under your window. The last thing I'll offer is also solar related, and that is, you know, in addition to rooftop solar, maybe you're a not a homeowner, but you're a renter, or you live in a condo, or you live in a community. Think about ways that you can access community energy. And Lydia, I mean, the innovation that's happening in Chinatown here in Boston is really phenomenal. I mean, they are upending our view of what is possible. So community energy is a vehicle for people to get involved in the energy transition. So look at what's happening in your state, and look at maybe who is creating community energy projects around you. I want to lift up Co-op Power here, because they're a sort of grassroots, organization committed to multi-generational, multi-racial coalitions to build community power, and they've done so around the country. So look at their website, check them out, and those are my very kind of practical starting places. And the more you learn about the energy system, I think the more you'll be excited to engage. We are recreating the system right now. And if we do so, as I said at the beginning, by replicating the models, the structures, assuming that this is only about technology and not about justice, then we're going to replicate inequality in this transition. So now is the time to get involved.
Wonderful. And I'm glad that you ended on that, because the first question that we have from the audience is literally just about that. And I think that every nonprofit goes through this, and you guys have had very successful models. So what the person wants to know is, we have to get the community involved. I would like to hear some ideas that the guests have on how to get people involved. Obviously, this is community control initiatives. We need to get the community informed and then involved. How did you guys do it in your communities?
I think that people get involved when it's something that really is meaningful to them. And community involvement at the local level is often the best way to grow that involvement. So, a lot of people, became involved in wanting to govern and improve this park, who had never been activists in the community, who never came to the community meetings, but because that's where they played volleyball every week. Or they lived right nearby the park, and they felt like it was just such a shame to see this kind of barren area that had so much potential. So it can start with something like that. It can start with being concerned about pedestrian safety in your community. And for many, many people, it's about fighting eviction and displacement in this moment. So I think it's really looking at what are those key issues in your community, and that's what's going to get people involved.
Yeah.
And I can add that, in our coalitions, including our public bank coalition, as I mentioned, we're prioritizing the membership and the participation of grassroots, neighborhood-based organizations and member-led organizations. Ours, New Economy Project, is a citywide organization, and so we work in coalition with these grassroots groups to bring about policy and other change. And I will just say that one thing that we've prioritized is making sure that we're developing popular education and other tools and strategies to really bring the information, make it engaging, make it accessible. This stuff doesn't have to be as wonky and inaccessible as sometimes people make it. And so we, really prioritize that, and connecting up, things like how would something like a public bank actually relate to and change some of the conditions in your neighborhoods that you all are working for? How does it connect up to your fight against speculation and private equity companies, buying up buildings and pushing longtime tenants out? How does it relate to your efforts to create social housing in CLTs in your communities, and so on? So we've been, really focusing on that so that we can, engage people meaningfully in some of the coalition activities and the decision making. And it's something we want to be doing more of as well. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, Anita, I think the next question is also for you. There's a few questions just for you. One of them is, how are public banks funded if you don't open an account?
Right. Well, so the depositor in this case would be, it's the city of New York. So there will be deposits, but it's not, there are different models that people are looking at, but primarily a public bank isn't holding individuals' deposits. It's holding public funds. And the ways that you can collateralize and capitalize a bank and get it off the ground and all the regulatory issues it's very technical and interesting. And there have been a few studies put out on this, and we're doing our own research in New York City. But yeah, you definitely need the public funds. And then what the concept is that you then leverage that money so that you can expand, again, investments and lending in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color, working in partnership with the neighborhood-based community development lenders that identify the opportunities and then partner up with the public bank so that they can actually make larger loans than they could on their own, given their relatively small size, and achieve greater scale and impact. And just, want to mention, just underscoring what the public bank needs are in our city are really, squarely focused, as I mentioned, on neighborhood-led economic development in communities of color. And what, many of our coalition members are focused on include community land trusts, which have grown exponentially in our city over the past few years. We're part of a coalition that helped get CLTs literally on the map in New York after decades in which there was just one operating land trust, as well as worker-owned businesses, again, which have, New York City is, some of the strongest and largest numbers of worker-owned businesses in the country, and that's a growing effort to shift control of workplace to immigrant and low-income workers who are often exploited, and then community-owned renewable energy. And, a little anecdote is that our small organization has a relatively small new economy loan fund through which we support these kinds of models, CLTs, worker-owned businesses. And recently we were able to make a pre-development loan to support really exciting and powerful community-owned solar rooftop project in a predominantly immigrant low-income neighborhood in Brooklyn. And literally this project, it was a multi-million-dollar project ultimately, but there was this small gap of $50,000 that was the sort of front stage, high-risk capital it needed to do the sort of feasibility study and other pre-development work. And without that, it held up the entire project. And our organization had to step in with other partners to fill that gap. So these are exactly the kinds of projects that we want a public bank to be able to support and expand access to capital for.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful to know. Another question that came up, and you both can talk about CLTs. What are the difficulties that potential homeowners within the CLT model face when they're trying to obtain financing to buy their homes? It's a different model, and sometimes, not all financings will finance this type of project. Have you had any, can you give us any feedback as far as difficulties that the homeowners have faced?
This is an area that I'm still learning about, to be honest, as we're just now marketing our first homes. I think that's what's really important for a community land trust is to get to know some of the financial institutions in your area, including community development finance institutions. So we actually are working with one of our local CDFIs as a preferred lender, because of that. But community land trust owners are able to get loans, are able to refinance, but it is an issue of educating those financial institutions. And in this moment, I would say that the biggest hurdle really is qualifying for a loan to buy, because so many people have been impacted by unemployment and underemployment.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen that in New York, Dayanira?
I think it's similar. I think Lydia captured that really well. I would say that you just add to that, a lot of the community land trusts that we're working with, and again, we're supporting about 15 emerging or CLTs or established ones that are growing. And a lot of the CLTs here are really squarely focused on creating housing that is deeply affordable. So aiming for very deep, affordability levels that right now the majority of affordable housing that's created aren't reaching. And so, looking as low as 30% of area median income or lower. And so I think the challenges are, are more about that. So looking at multifamily kind of financing options and other subsidy, frankly, that needs to happen so that they can reach the deeper affordability levels that community members need, which may not be alone. It may just require greater public investment in this model.
Yes. Ms. Baker, one of the questions for you is this. You mentioned as one of the things, it's like understanding the things that happen under the radar. Can you, as far as energy laws and commissions and so on, things that are not, widely known by the general public, can you expand a little bit more on how our viewers can actually get involved in that tomorrow?
Sure. So I'm seeing a lot of great input in the chat from Miami Catalyst. It sounds like, or Catalyst Miami, it sounds like there are lots of resources around energy that the host organization already has. So I want to pick up on one thing that was said, I think by Dayanira, actually, about public education. So I was the co-founder and former co-director of the Initiative for Energy Justice. And we have a lot of resources online, www.iejUSA.org, where we are really trying to fill the gap and bring organizers, community folks into the energy policy sphere, because it's intentionally exclusive, right? Like it's meant to be so complex and so difficult, where someone has all the information and, folks who have the most at stake in this don't. And so there needs to be more work around lowering those barriers to entry. But in every state, there's a public utilities commission or a regulatory commission. Sometimes it seems like they're living in the 1970s because their websites probably have like dot matrix format. Like it's a lot of the public utility commissions are, underfunded, understaffed, but there is one in your state. And I would encourage you to get involved, right? So to give a call, to find out what your consumer advocate is saying about issues that matter to you. So every state has a consumer advocate. Sometimes that's the attorney general in the state. Sometimes it's a separate office that is supposed to advocate on behalf of consumers. Now, in most clean energy proceedings or solar proceedings, a lot of times consumer advocates are focused only on cost. And that's important, obviously, but they're often not taking the longer view about how to change the environmental impacts in communities, right? Like what does rooftop solar ultimately provide? It lowers air pollution over time, right? We have to think about the long-term benefits that come from things like rooftop solar, and costs are always going to be on the table and need to be weighed. But I would encourage folks to really get engaged with the consumer advocate as they're trying to get some of the work done. And I saw Lydia had to drop off, and hopefully we'll pop back on with her internet connection. I also see a question about fighting back against utilities.
Yes. That was the next thing I was going to ask you. Yes.
Oh, okay,
Because
cool.
we have a lot of advocates, specifically in South Florida, in that realm. And how do you fight back? I mean, there's a lot of money behind those companies.
Organize, organize, organize. I mean, this is why I wrote the book, really getting people who are my aunt, my uncle, and anecdote. My cousin has the book. She's in her 70s, and she sends me an email every day about, how to change her local community. So it's really a book that's meant for people that aren't familiar with energy to just pick up and be able to get engaged. But I would say fighting against utilities is very much about organizing, because a lot of folks don't understand what the stakes of this transition are and the stakes of sort of, these battles. Florida should have among the highest rooftop solar in the country, but it doesn't. And that's because of the work of Florida Power and Light. And I can tell you that when I lived in Hawaii, Florida Power and Light, which was owned, so NextEra, which was the parent company for Florida Power and Light, came to Hawaii wanting to buy Hawaii's utility, and the people there organized. And, I was on the ground. I was a part of that. I was doing community education listening sessions, but it was because they understood the stakes that perhaps Florida Power and Light, or NextEra, would limit their ability to access solar because they had seen them do the same thing in Florida. And so I think raising public awareness about the links between access to clean energy and health, and all of the ways in which housing security is implicated, all of those links need to be made. And I feel like the environmental justice community, as well as the civil rights community, need to be involved in this transition if only the stakes were made clear. And so I would say there's just so much at stake as we move forward.
Well, ladies, I want to thank you. We're almost out of time. It's been an honor, a pleasure to speak with you today. We want to thank everyone that has been joining us today. And we want to thank Catalyst Miami for hosting this amazing summit that is so needed in our Miami ecosystem. I hope this conversation has allowed us to understand and appreciate more deeply the various community control initiatives that can help our communities thrive. I encourage you to participate in the upcoming panels tomorrow, today, and Saturday. We will have a co-op panel as well. We'll have a community land trust panel tomorrow at noon, a community energy panel at 1 p.m., a public banking panel at 5 p.m., and a workers co-op panel at 6 p.m. That is all tomorrow, Friday, February 5th. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.